Okay, we're in unit number 2 still, working through question number 8 on page 8 of your notes. Pretty important question, and here it is. It says, what does 3 meters per second squared actually mean? What does it mean? If you have an acceleration of 3 meters per second squared, what does that actually mean? Well, I'm going to actually back this up a little bit and use a concept that we went through in the last video. And remember that we said meters per second squared was the same as meter per second per second. I'm going to actually use that concept here so we can kind of understand what they're going for when we say 3 meters per second squared. So I'm going to say that 3 meters per second squared is the same thing as 3 meters per second per second. And I'm going to put a 1 with that seconds down there. Algebraically means the same thing. So what does this mean? Because if I know what this means, and if this is the same as this, then I know what this means as well, because they're the same thing. So here's what it means. It means, and I sometimes read this from bottom up, it's a little bit easier to work through. It means this: for every second that goes by, your speed changes 3 meters per second. That's what that means. Every second that goes by, your speed changes 3 meters per second, or your velocity changes 3 meters per second. So let's use an example. Let's say that we're traveling down the road at 5 meters per second, and I let 1 second pass by. Well, if my acceleration is 3 meters per second, that means every second it goes by, I have to change my speed or velocity by 3 meters per second. So I'm going to have to add to this 3. So 3 plus 5 is going to give us 8 meters per second. Let me write that a little bit better so it's not as confusing. So 8 meters per second. If I let another second go by, and my acceleration is still 3 meters per second, then I need to add another 3 meters per second to this. So 8 plus 3 is going to give us 11 meters per second. If I let another second go by, and I still have the acceleration of 3 meters per second, then I'll be traveling at 14 meters per second. Don't need the line there. All right, so that's what 3 meters per second squared back over here means. It means every second that goes by, you change your speed 3 meters per second. All right, so then what does negative 3 meters per second mean? Well, we can use the same thing. So that's the same thing as saying negative 3 meters per second every 1 second. So let's pretend that I'm traveling at, let's say 9 meters per second, and I have an acceleration of negative 3 meters per second. So every second that goes by, I change my speed, or my velocity, negative 3 meters per second. So if I was going at 9 plus negative 3 gives me 6 meters per second. Notice what's happening. Yeah, I'm actually slowing down in this process. Now, don't fall into the trap and say, oh. So every time you have a negative acceleration, you're slowing down. No, that is not always the case. Don't fall into that trap. The best way of saying it is, every second that goes by, your velocity changes negative 3 meters per second. That's the most appropriate way of stating that. Let's keep going through. So if I still have an acceleration of negative 3 meters per second, then my speed after this is going to be 3 meters per second, because I have to subtract 3 from 6. And then I go again, I can go 0 meters per second. Keep subtracting 3. Now here's where it becomes interesting. If I continue with that same acceleration, I'll have a new speed of negative 3 meters per second. So what's kind of weird is we were slowing down till we got to here. We came to rest, and all of a sudden we sped up. So what does negative 3 meters per second squared mean? All it simply means is that every second that goes by, your velocity changes negative 3 meters per second.